A new Iranian proposal to the US reportedly offers to open the Strait of Hormuz if talks on Tehran's nuclear program are postponed. The proposal was reviewed by the Trump administration while Iran's top diplomat was in Russia. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Tuesday, April 28th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi sat down with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Monday for talks that reaffirmed commitment to bilateral ties amid Tehran's confrontation with Washington. For more on this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German press agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, it's great to have you here.
Great to be back in the studio.
I also have Professor Choi Hyun-Jin at Kyung Hee University live on the line. Professor Choi, it's lovely to have you on.
Great to be here.
Fabian, we start here in the studio. So as I mentioned, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was in Moscow for talks with Putin on Monday. What has been disclosed about their discussions?
Yeah, actually, the Iranian top diplomat has had a big diplomatic tour that led him to Oman, to Pakistan, and now the last leg was to Russia. And actually, not much was published what was said, but I mean, both sides said that they had constructive talks. Both sides praised the strategic importance of the bilateral relationship. And Araghchi blamed the US for the failed peace talks so far. That is not surprising. Now, why is he visiting the Russia? I think he wants to get Russia more involved in terms of further steps. I mean, it could be diplomatic to bring peace. I think that's Iranian preferred way to get an exit out of this war, albeit on their own terms. And also economically, Russia is important also for evading sanctions and all of that. But there could also be a further escalation of the war. I mean, there are some speculations that the US and Israel might mobilize troops and start escalating again. So I think even for that scenario, he would like to coordinate with Russia. And I think then if there could be further peace talks, Russia is interested in becoming more involved as a negotiator, as a mediator. And one key question so far why the peace talks have been stalled and even failed was the nuclear question. And I mean, this is unconfirmed. This is only my speculation. The US wants Iran to get rid of its enriched uranium. And that is so far not acceptable for Iran. But Iran might suggest that it would give its enriched uranium to a third country. And this third country could potentially be Russia. And I think for that it's also important that both countries coordinate closely with each other.
Right. In the meantime, Professor Choi, what are your thoughts on the timing of these latest talks in Moscow? I believe the last time Araghchi was in Moscow was about 10 months ago during heightened tensions after US strikes on Iran.
Yes, I think the timing is very important. This talk between Iran and Russia come right after the tension rose again, and the talk with Washington broke down once again. So the first goal of this meeting seems to managing the crisis. But secondly, the meeting also shows that Russia wants to tell the world it still has a role to play in the Middle East. And I think Moscow does not want to be excluded in this situation. It also wants to show that Russia has still some influence, not only in diplomacy, but also in global energy and security issue. And thirdly, and I think this meeting sends a broader political message to the entire world. So it may show the closer ties between Iran and Russia, but there's also important implication. And there is some growing alignment among countries such as Iran and Russia, some countries pushing back against American pressure. So some even may even see China in that picture. So as you just mentioned, this is not the first meeting between the two countries, not just during this crisis. We also saw similar meeting and contact last year. So this suggests that this is not a one-time event, but a part of a broader and trend in world politics. And I think the important part of this trend is the growing alignment among like-minded countries pushing back against American pressure.
Right, and speaking about world politics, Fabian, news website Politico says Trump's Iran showdown is becoming Europe's political nightmare. Is this the case for Germany, would you say?
Well, I found this was quite a fitting description, and I mean, it holds true to more or less all of Europe, but especially for Germany. I mean, just yesterday on Monday, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he made some really remarkable statements. He said about the US that, you know, an entire nation is being humiliated by the Iranian leadership. And he basically also blamed the US that they don't have a convincing negotiation strategy. He also said the Iranians are obviously stronger than expected. And this comes all from a politician who always prided himself of being very pro-transatlantic and a very pro-US. But with Trump, I mean, things have changed. And why is it a political nightmare? Let me break this down. Trump started the war without informing the European Union. There was no coordination. So basically, he did it on his own terms and then expected Europe to bear the consequences and help out. So, for example, there were big dilemmas. How should Europe react? There are many US bases, and for the conflict in the Middle East, the US needs the air bases, for example, in Germany and in other European countries. And so basically, whether Europe wants or not, it is already involved in this conflict. And another question is also for the Strait of Hormuz. Europe is expected by the US to help out when it comes to securing the trade route. And you know, it's kind of interesting that most of the economic impact, actually, I mean, the US is also affected. I mean, every big economy is affected, but European countries more so, and especially Germany. It's an export-driven economy. It has a high manufacturing sector. It needs a lot of energy, and high energy prices are not good for the country. And also, if there should be like a big refugee or migration movement, I think they will go to Europe and especially Germany and not to the US, of course. So there is a dilemma that actually Europe is dissatisfied with the war. Germany is dissatisfied with the war. But can they criticize the US? Yeah, to a certain degree, but it comes with a price because Germany and the European Union depend on the US for their security. They also want President Trump not to completely abandon Ukraine. So they have to find a middle way and kind of walk a fine line here because there are conflicting interests. And let me just very briefly add that the US is also fed up with Europe. And from their point of view, I can understand it also a little bit because they say, look, we have all those military bases in Europe, but really when we need to use them, we cannot even use them in some cases. And where are you when we need the NATO partners to secure the trade routes? So I think it is very complicated right now.
It really is complicated. And against this backdrop, Professor Choi, CNN claims that Iran is suffering amid its standoff with the US, but that it might be betting that Mr. Trump will blink first. Now, this is according to the CNN article, of course. What do you believe are the prospects of this potential scenario of Mr. Trump blinking first, and what would be its broader implications?
Yeah, I read that article as well. And it seems to me that the CNN is describing the situation as something like chicken game, like the game of who blink first or who back down first. So I think Iran may hope the President Trump blink first, of course, but I would be very careful with that kind of view. And frankly, we should not take that CNN framing too far. This is much more complicated than that. So I see the situation more as a test of who can hold out longer. Of course, Iran may believe that the time could work in its favor, especially global oil price continue to rise, and also the domestic political pressure grow inside Washington. Okay. However, but President Trump may also believe that this America's economic and the military pressure can compel Iran to back down first. So let's imagine the situation. So what if the United States back down too early, or if Donald Trump blink first? I think that could carry huge domestic political costs for Donald Trump, especially with the midterm election coming in this November. And also, if Donald Trump blink first, and other U.S. rival countries such as North Korea, China, and Russia, and other, some rival country in the Middle East may draw very important lesson from this situation about how to compel America to back down. I think this could matter not only in the Middle East, but also in East Asia, including the Korean Peninsula. So based on this, general consideration, I would not assume President Trump is likely to blink first.
Right. All this, of course, purely speculation based on the article by CNN. Fabian, there are reports, of course, as I mentioned in the short clip ahead of our session, that a new proposal has been extended to the U.S. from Iran. What is known about this new peace proposal?
Yeah, I would call this a sincere peace proposal, but really not sure if the US would agree on this. So basically it says, let's de-escalate first and then deal with the nuclear question later. So supposedly Iran will offer to open the Strait of Hormuz, and then of course the US would also open their sea blockade. And then the details about what to do with the nuclear program of Iran would be negotiated later. However, I mean, it's well known that Iran is very good at buying time, at making the sequence very smart in their terms, and then pushing back those really hard decisions. So would it be smart for the US to agree on this? I would say it's relatively unrealistic, and Trump has already said, according to media reports, that he is not very happy with this suggestion. However, as Professor Choi mentioned, that the midterm elections are following. Trump has also domestic pressure, political pressure. The US public is also not happy about high energy prices, and they see it at the gasoline station every day. And the real ripple-on effects of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, they really take effect only starting maybe these weeks, because the passage of the oil tankers takes several weeks. So what we've seen now was that already the oil has been delivered, that started to arrive or started to go out before the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So the markets who have still performed relatively well, they have priced in the scenario that the Strait of Hormuz will reopen relatively shortly. But if that does not happen, then I think also the stock markets might show a very strong reaction, and that is really bad news for Donald Trump, because he is really under pressure by the US consumers who expect a booming stock market.
Right. Professor Choi, I understand that this next question may be quite tough, but what do you envision happening with regard to the current showdown between the US and Iran over the next few weeks, especially ahead of Mr. Trump's planned trip to Beijing to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in May?
I think that maybe President Trump himself has no answer to this question. But in my thought, I think a full resolution in the near term is unlikely, unfortunately. The President Trump will likely want two things. The first one is clear abandonment, a complete abandonment of Iran's nuclear program, and transferring Iranian uranium to the United States. So he can show Iranian uranium to American people as a clear sign of a victory before the election. And secondly, the full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But think about it, from Iran's side, those two demands are very hard to accept. And especially on the nuclear side, the key decisions are not made by the Iranian president or foreign minister. So I think much depends on the decision made by Iran's military leaders, especially the Revolutionary Guard. And right now, it seems to me that those military leaders of Iran do not seem to willing to give up their nuclear program. So unfortunately, I do not see a comprehensive deal coming soon before the summit meeting with Xi Jinping. So my sense is that we may see a continued pressure and some limited diplomacy and a prolonged standoff rather than a full resolution between the two countries. And that's why I think the crisis is likely to continue for some time without a full solution.
Fabian, here on the Korean Peninsula this past weekend, North Korea's Kim Jong-un, he welcomed a Russian delegation, including Defense Minister Andrei Belousov. Could you tell us a bit about the purpose of that particular visit and its broader implications?
Yeah, I would say the last week was quite historic in terms of North Korea-Russia relations. I think at least 3 ministers were in the country, and among them also the defense minister. Why does this happen now? I mean, just 1 year ago, Russia celebrated what it calls the liberation of Kursk, the region between near to the border of Ukraine that is Russian, then was conquered by Ukraine, and then reconquered by Russia with the help of a lot of North Korean soldiers. So the NIS, the Secret Service here in South Korea, is estimating that North Korea sent roughly 15,000 soldiers, also sent a lot of ammunition and artillery to help Russia in the war effort. And roughly 600 soldiers have died. That's only a guess. We don't know the official numbers. But now this kind of military collaboration seems to pay off for North Korea. So in the last week, North Korea-Russia Friendship Hospital was, the groundwork has been laid. The construction is starting. There's a border, like a bridge between Russia and North Korea under construction. And just on the weekend, the opening ceremony was held for the memorial for the fallen North Korean soldiers in the war in Ukraine. And both sides, the defense minister of Russia and Kim Jong-un, the ruler of North Korea, supposedly will agree to a 5-year plan in terms of military cooperation. And that is really formalizing. I mean, it's not really an alliance, but a quasi-alliance, I would say. And if they make plans for the next 5 years, that would show that probably there will be a lot of technology transfer, joint military drills and all this. So at least from the perspective of South Korea, I think this is also quite concerning to see that North Korea and Russia are getting really, really close.
Right. I wonder, Professor Choi, do you suppose the Trump administration's current handling of Iran's nuclear weapons, nuclear program itself has emboldened perhaps North Korea with regard to its future interaction with the US? And if that is the case, how should South Korea approach North Korea?
Yes, I think North Korea may get a very important lesson from this crisis. So the Pyongyang may conclude that countries facing American pressure become vulnerable if they do not have a strong and operational nuclear deterrent. And because of that, I think the chance of North Korea giving up its nuclear weapon have become even lower than before. And beyond keeping its current nuclear capability, I think North Korea may push even harder to build a stronger strategic capability, including nuclear submarine and also hypersonic ballistic missile, based on the cooperation with Russia. And I think that's why the strong deterrence through the Korea-US alliance has become even more important to maintain strategic stability in the Korean Peninsula. And at the same time, deterrence alone is not enough. The lowering tension and maintaining dialogue with Pyongyang is also important as well, because our ultimate goal is to prevent war in the Korean Peninsula. So I would say this crisis between Iran and the United States make both military deterrence and also dialogue and diplomacy more important than before.
Right, Professor Choi, your words bring to mind a quote by a pundit who claimed if diplomacy is made impossible, then war becomes inevitable. On that note, I'll end today's talk. Professor Choi, as always, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
And Fabian here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Right, on that note, we end Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow, that is Wednesday, with more panel discussion, and this time on tourism in South Korea. Do join us then.